Good morning or afternoon to those joining us from other than the Pacific Coast. Welcome to FSMA Fridays. Jill Bender here with Safety Chain. Always a delight to host these monthly sessions. Very excited about this month's discussion. Listeria certainly has been in the news, always in the news, but lots of activity around that topic right now, and I'm delighted that we'll be talking about Listeria guidance from the FDA. Few housekeeping tips before we get started. As always, we record these and a link will be sent out over the next few days. If you have questions that you'd like to submit, go ahead and put them into the Q&A tab and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. For your privacy, as always, you'll just see myself and Dr. Acheson that's on the call with us today. But again, delighted, as always. It just seems like the crowd keeps building each month on these sessions. If you have trouble hearing, please go ahead and use the call-in number. That might be easier than your computer speakers. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, Dr. Acheson. How are you this morning?
Doing well, thank you, Jill. Doing well, and welcome to everybody. Look forward to stimulating Listeria 30 minutes.
Yes, it will be interesting to see how we progress here. But before we get started, share with us latest FSMA updates, please.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the biggest question or update, well, it's not an update yet, is will FSMA exist 6 months from now? Where's that all going to go, and is FSMA going to disappear? Let me touch on that. Actually, subject of our most recent newsletter for those who keep track of TAG's weekly newsletters, and if you don't and you want to, then please just reach out to us, and we'd be happy to put you on there. But anyway, interesting little. Dismantling regulations in the first 100 days came out from Congressman Meadows a little while ago, in which some of the FSMA regs were on the list to remove. Two particularly were the intentional adulteration rule, and the other one was the preventive control rule for human foods. All other rules remained intact. They weren't on his list. Interesting choice of rules to get rid of. So we get rid of the human rule, we leave the animal rule, and as you'll see if you read our newsletter, a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment from me is that it would appear that the congressman puts the safety of our kids below that of our pets. But anyway, that's a sidebar. Personally, I don't think these FSMA regs are going to go anywhere. I think we may well see a reduction in funding for them, so enforcement may back off a little bit. But my advice to everybody is just to continue to build programs, unless we hear something very concrete, assume that they will be in place, although I suspect enforcement discretion may get more of a play than it has in the past. Other FSMA updates, we're hearing FDA talk about training of inspectors, so that's underway. Not really hearing a great deal yet about impacts of visits from inspectors around FSMA. Obviously, the subject of today's conversation is to talk about this new Listeria guidance that's come out. And the only other comment that I'd make, Jill, in terms of FSMA updates, which is sort of a little peripheral to FSMA, is that some of you may have seen the latest report from the GAO, Government Accountability Office, who was tasked to yet again say, should we have a single food safety agency? And this report came out a week or so ago, and in which the GAO basically didn't call for a single food safety agency per se, but what they did call for was a national food safety strategy. So just essentially making sure that all the federal agencies are communicating properly, sharing information, sharing resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it really didn't, in my opinion, say anything unexpected. I don't see any of that changing either. This report was commissioned in the previous administration, and I really don't see it going anywhere. So a few little tidbits on FSMA, nothing huge, but again, bottom line is continue to build, plan, and assume if you are a small business that you will have to be online for preventive control rules by September. So with that, Jill, back to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's interesting. There were certainly communications flying around our company about the two rules that were being looked at. A bit of a scratching the heads. I'm sure many people on board here are thinking about that as well. So thank you for that update. As well as the single agency. I know you brought that up before. As far as just the whole process itself just would be a huge process to combine them, right? If they were looking to do that anytime soon.
Yeah, it would be a massive undertaking. It would be costly, and again, it's not going to happen, I don't think, under this administration. Actually, one other point that I should have mentioned in the rules that are slated, and it's not FSMA per se, but there was a lot of focus on the new labeling requirements. A lot of those rules, which I'm sure everybody on the call is aware of, will be coming in. They were also listed as ones to go away. And frankly, this is, Acheson opinion. I think those are more vulnerable, frankly. I do see those ones as being a bit more vulnerable to get changed. Obviously, menu labeling is intricately linked with the Affordable Care Act, and as we all know, that's up for a change. So I think we may see some of the nutrition facts panel labeling requirements slowed down, changed. We'll see, but they are a little bit more vulnerable. But again, Jill, a little peripheral to FSMA, but more sort of general regulatory thinking.
No, absolutely. That's why I enjoy these monthly updates. I love that we talk just beyond FSMA as well. Okay, well, let's get going on Listeria, our favorite topic this month, right? Topic du jour. Why don't we? So share with us, why is the FDA focusing on Listeria?
Well, I think there's, you've kind of got to have been asleep at the switch under a rock or whatever the euphemism is not to have noticed recall after recall after recall linked to Listeria in the environment, Listeria in products, and obviously, sadly, some situations where there's been some fairly significant outbreaks and public health risk from Listeria in certain foods. But to your point, the question, why Listeria? Interesting pathogen. The Centers for Disease Control report about 2,500 cases a year of listeriosis. And, just to get a little medical on everybody, listeriosis is essentially when the disease actually manifests itself in people. And as we all know, it's typically the elderly, the immune compromised, or the fetuses of pregnant women that are particularly susceptible. But 2,500 cases a year. Contrast that with Salmonella, where it's about 1 million. So, whoa, that's a big difference. So why all the focus on Listeria? Listeria, if you get it and you get listeriosis, which is basically Listeria in the bloodstream, again, as I think many people are aware, that is very serious, very high hospitalization rate, high mortality rate, 20%-ish. So it's very serious when you get it. The focus on Listeria, I think, is partly because of its public health consequence. Clearly not because of its amount of disease. It's way less than Salmonella. But interestingly, it was one of the first areas where the FDA were focused on whole genome sequencing, and it's often because of its incubation period, the time between when you get exposed and when you get sick. It's difficult to connect a food or a food plant with the disease, and genetic technology has allowed us to do this. We've seen it with the older technology of pulse field gel. We're seeing it even more today with whole genome sequencing. So it is unquestionably a focus. It is partly just, I think, because it was the first organism that really we started to build databases on, and the fact that it's been a tough one to connect. But irrespective of the whys, which are purely speculative, the reality is it is a huge focus. And regulators on all sides, meat, poultry, as well as FDA, are, in my opinion, starting to map plants. That's what these swabathons are all about. It's like, what have you got lurking in your drains today that may come back and bite you 5 years from now? So this is a very serious matter for people to really pay attention to. And it's one of, if I was to put one of the top 2 or 3 things that keeps me awake at night with food companies, it is environmental contaminants, especially if you're making a ready-to-eat food. So that really is the focus of the Listeria guidance from the FDA. So irrespective of the reasoning, this is definitely a hot topic.
No, absolutely, and it's interesting the way you put that in perspective as far as the number of cases and so forth. Thank you for that. I hadn't really thought about that angle before. So if we go on to the next question then, what is the general message that the FDA is providing in the guidance document?
My view of this is, and I, first of all, I congratulate FDA on getting this guidance document out. Overall, I think it's very helpful. I think there's a ton of really good information in it. There's great advice. There's great suggestions, and it does signal to us the seriousness with which the FDA views Listeria in the environment and getting into ready-to-eat food products. So I think the general message from the FDA is go into an environmental control program with your eyes wide open. Understand where your Listeria risks are. Where are they coming in from? Is it in raw ingredient? Is it people? Is it equipment? Is it airflow? Is it drains? So there's a lot of good stuff in there, and the general message is, number one, as I said, figure out where it's coming from, understand how to control it through multiple methodologies, and then make sure you're controlling it through your environmental monitoring program. And it's kind of holistic guidance. It isn't just how do you monitor for Listeria. It is about how do you control it. And I think that's the general message. It's a long document. It's 80-plus pages, and it's got lots of good information, as I said, about where's it coming from, how do you control it, how should you be checking for it, how do you follow up on things. So that's really the general message, Jill.
Okay, great. And I know in the past with these guidance documents, you've made the links available on your website. Is that the case with this one?
Yes, and I don't know whether we've actually got this one up there, but to your point, we will.
Okay, yeah, well, why don't we add that in the follow-up email when it's posted, so that will be great. I know it's always a good help there. So with that, what is the general approach? I know you mentioned that the FDA is suggesting, the monitor of pest control. Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it would take us hours to go through to go through all of the nuances in this. But just to summarize, the general approach is, as I've said, is looking at how do you control the risks. And it sort of it's a practical approach in my view. Some of the segments are around actually how you can read this guidance document and you can apply it to your facility around the risks of personnel. There's some interesting sections on the use of foot baths and foamers and dry powdered sanitizers. And there's some interesting sections on footwear. And the pros and cons of that. And obviously there's a lot of economic considerations that need to be taken into account here, and we don't all have the opportunity to design our perfect ready-to-eat plant. A lot of us are managing with legacy facilities that are old and they're not designed for current thinking. So it's a challenge. So we get some interesting parts on personnel. There's then some good parts on overall construction and flow of air and water systems and drains and those types of things. And then excellent sections on how you approach cleaning and sanitation, because obviously that's a key part. You keep the bugs out. You make sure that if they get in there, you've got rid of them. Comments on some sort of very specific details around drains and sanitizers and all those sorts of things. And then it moves more generally into, okay, so where do you look? Where should you be looking? How do you set up your environmental monitoring program? And as I said, Jill, this guidance document isn't just about how do you establish an environmental monitoring program. It has that in there for sure, in a lot of detail, but it's much broader than that, which is why I think it's helpful.
So I know you've mentioned many guidance documents in the past as they've been coming out, so it sounds like this one definitely provides that practical approach, as you mentioned, beyond some of the other ones.
It does. But as and I will likely get into this in a moment or two. But there's some red flags in this guidance document as well, and it's so I think that part of what I was thinking on this FSMA Friday is to sort of begin to look at some of the specific details in there and say, well, if we follow this guidance by the letter, what exactly is it asking us to do, and will it get us in trouble? And I sort of like, yeah, I think it might if we're not kind of keeping our eyes and our ears open as we move forward.
Well, interesting, because that probably leads us to that next question when you were wanting to talk about the pros and cons of zone one testing that they're suggesting.
Yes. So the FDA obviously recognize the classic zone 1 through 4 approach and lay out their definitions of it, which I think fits with the definitions that we all tend to use. And FDA has always been keen on zone 1. And for anybody who's been on this, who's been in the situation of getting on the wrong end of a swabathon will know exactly what I'm talking about. When the FDA show up and there's 2 or 3 individuals and they've got their swabs, you can almost guarantee they will be, number one, they'll be incredibly thorough. They will be going into places you didn't even know existed in your plant. They really are very, very thoughtful in my personal experience of seeing some of these. But they will be all over zone 1. Which is food contact surface, irrespective of whether you're running the line or you're not running the line. FDA has always believed that zone 1 testing is a very good indicator of risk, and of course it is. It goes without saying that if your food contact surface is clean, and you do not have Listeria species, or specifically Listeria monocytogenes in this context, on zone 1 food contact, you're in good shape. No argument about that. The concern comes with, so when do you test zone 1, this food contact surface? And the guidance makes it, to my way of thinking, I think they send out 2 very strong messages. The first is, we would like you to, quote, we expect you to, we guide you to do zone 1 testing in the middle of a production run. That's what we'd really like you to do. And they make the point several hours into a production run, take your zone 1 samples, and keep going. We'll come in a second, I think, Jill, to the implications of doing that and what it means if you find a positive. But that's a very, very clear recommendation. If you're going to follow this guidance to the letter, that's what you will do. You will take zone 1 during production. Now, how much zone 1 should I take? Well, the guidance isn't specific. There's one little line in the guidance document which I thought was kind of fun that made the point. I don't actually have the specific language in front of it, but the gist of it is that if you are a small plant, we would recommend, and say you take 10 swabs per line, we would recommend that of those 10 swabs, 5 of them, i.e. 50%, be taken on food contact and 5 be taken in other zones. So if you extrapolate that, quietly, the FDA is recommending that about 50% of the environmental samples we take should be zone 1s. In a larger plant, it may not be quite that number, but the message here is they want us to do a lot of zone 1 testing during production runs. And I suspect there isn't a person on the call who isn't thinking, really? Assuming that you haven't actually fully read the guidance document, and it's like, well, what are we supposed to do with the product? Let it go, hang on to it. And I will say this, I think, repeatedly before we're done with this call. My recommendation, irrespective of anything in the guidance and anything else you may hear, is if you take zone 1 during a production run, hold the product. Whenever you take it, if it's whenever, however, this notion of doing zone 1 testing and releasing the product and keeping your fingers crossed is a bad, I think, business strategy. We've seen it come back and bite many, many, many times. But to get to the question, Jill, it's this sort of very clear message, I think, in the guidance document is we would like you to test zone 1, we, the FDA. And the pros are, yeah, it's a really good way of knowing whether the product that you're making is likely to be contaminated with Listeria. Absolutely. Great public health tool. The cons are obvious. The cons are as I said, hold the product. That's massive, potentially massive economic consequence, particularly if it's a short shelf life product. Even if it's not, you've got to have storage space. How big is your run? How much do you hold? How long do you hold it for? You may not get the result for 48 hours, and so on and so on and so forth. So the cons are significant. I think a con is if you're not testing zone 1s, will FDA ding you for it? I don't know the answer to that. The guidance very clearly says you should be. Guidance is not binding. We can't get 483 because we didn't test zone 1s. But this is a big but, and that is to make sure that your overall environmental control program is very thorough. If you choose to have a sloppy program and you're not testing zone 1s and there's a problem, I think the consequences could be quite dire. So lots of pros and cons in terms of around zone 1 testing, but again, I'll reiterate the point. FDA is saying, we want you to test zone 1 during the production run. If you do that, hold product, irrespective of what FDA may be suggesting. So, little thought on zone 1 there, Jill.
Oh, well, a little. It's quite big, right? You think about having to add that protocol into your plan, right?
Yeah. No, it's got some significant consequences to it, and maybe in time we'll see it play out a little differently. But for now, I think keep a very, very open mind and a very risk-averse approach to what you do with zone 1 testing.
Okay. Well, hand in hand, I guess, and you kind of alluded to this, is, will the FDA offer a free pass on the first zone 1 positive? Yeah.
This is a really, to me, a very interesting question that the FDA's brought up into the guidance document. When you first read it, and well, let me back up a little bit. For those of you who haven't read it, there's a couple of very nice flowcharts in the guidance document, and what to do if you get a non-food contact surface positive. They've got this nice flowchart which gets at that. They've got some good information around what to do with that. Then there is interesting sections on what do you do if you get a positive on a zone on a food contact surface, and one of the tables and figures that are in the guidance documents gets into this, and it kind of leads you through progressively what you would do if you got a food contact surface positive. And one of the questions that pops up is this: is you're doing routine sampling, you've got a positive on a food contact surface for Listeria species, and everything's been going fine. You're following the guidance, and you've tested a Listeria zone 1 during a production run. And the general sort of, I think, tenor of the guidance document is, as I've said, the FDA is encouraging us to test zone 1. They're not, in my opinion, encouraging us to test zone 1 and hold the product. They're kind of saying test zone 1 and let it go. And in their flow chart, supposing you get a food contact surface Listeria species, let's just differentiate. Listeria species positive, first positive. And the recommendations they make are Totally appropriate, logical, makes sense. You clean the area and you retest the food contact surface, surrounding area during the next production cycle, and you conduct a comprehensive investigation. Yes, absolutely, you would do that. And let's assume that all your follow-up tests for Listeria species are negative. You're fine. You're good. And you've let the product go. Assuming you haven't held it, you've just let it go. You've got a food contact surface Listeria species positive. No mention in the guidance that that would constitute a panic, that you should be thinking, oh my goodness, that Listeria species could be an LM. Do I need to report it to the reportable food registry? No mention of that at all. So that's the scenario, food contact surface, zone 1, positive for species, clean it up and it goes away. Fine, good, done. Okay, what happens if food contact surface positive, zone 1, first time, clean it all up, and you do it again, you test it again, and it's like, oops, my second test is positive. Well, again, good advice from the FDA is by this time you likely are holding product. They obviously recommend more cleaning, more sampling, more testing, and very clearly it's saying consider product hold and test for a food contact surface species. This is our second positive language in the guidance. Consider product hold and test. All right. So yes, good thought. Hold and test. Well, as you've heard from David, my recommendation is hold right from the get-go, even if you're doing zone 1s. So we've now got a situation where we have a second positive. And there is a bit of a difference in the guidance between foods that support the growth of Listeria and foods that do not. But let's assuming that you're dealing with a product that does support the growth. You've got your second positive, and as you read through the chart that they provided, which again is I think is very helpful, we're now sort of saying, we should test the food for Listeria monocytogenes. And I've got it right in front of me, and I'm just going to read from it. And this is if you have the second positive species. We've intensified the cleaning, and they're recommending hold and test food for mono from the first of 3 consecutive days. So bear in mind they're having you now test food for mono based on a second positive, food that you've held from production days. And what happens if that tests positive? Well, it says reprocess, divert, or destroy the product. Well, yes, of course. We've got a Listeria monocytogenes product. We're not going to ship it. And couple of little words at the end there say, and consider recall. Well, recall what? Following this guidance on my second positive, I'm holding product. So I don't have anything to recall, but oops, do I? Because this tracks back to my first positive, which I shipped. That's what you're going to be recalling, in my opinion, plus maybe even broader. So little long-winded, Jill, and hopefully people on the phone are tracking with me. But for those in the food safety world who follow the Food Safety Inspection Service activities, they'll be well aware of the FSIS mulligan, as everybody calls it, in which you can have a positive and you're okay and you can get away with it. You have like the free pass. My view, again, David's opinion, is that this is not a free pass. FDA is not offering anybody a free pass. I think my translation of this is that if you are testing zone 1s for Listeria species during a production run and you ship the product and you get a positive subsequently, you clean it all up, everything's good, you do a thorough swabbing, and everything is negative, you're okay. You're okay. You wouldn't have to do anything. If on that second round of testing you get a second positive, you're in all kinds of bother and all kinds of trouble. and you will be probably looking at having to determine whether it's Listeria mono in the finished product, and if you find it, you'll be looking at a recall. So bottom line is this is not a free pass. This is not the equivalent of an FSIS mulligan. And back to what I said earlier, if you're going to do zone 1 testing during a production run, be dang sure to hold on to that product, in my opinion. So a lot more detail in the guidance, Jill, and different people may have different interpretations of it, but I think my message to the FSMA Friday community is if you're going to do zone 1 testing, hold it. How many times have I said that? You can't say it too often.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the thinking, and if people have got questions or alternative opinions, love to hear them about that one.
No, absolutely. And we did get a chat in as you were talking about this, asking for the recording because they want to share it with their risk management team on what you were saying. So I think the audience is definitely listening to what you're saying. So thank you for that. Certainly my eyes are wide open here. Okay, well, let's, and I think you already talked about this, but I think one of our last topics for today as we sort of wrap up FSMA Fridays here in about 5 minutes or so is, again, what should companies do regarding Listeria and FSMA, right, tying those together?
Yeah, right. Well, let's try to tie it all together. Number one, take environmental controls very seriously. The message here is whole genome sequencing, swabathons, mapping facilities for pathogens, and I'd extend this to salmonella too if that's part of your world and the environment. It is probably one of the highest risks for food companies today if you're making a ready-to-eat product. It's certainly, aside from a labeling mistake, it's certainly going to be one of the most likely causes for recall. So Listeria, salmonella control in the environment, and good monitoring, absolutely critical, really, really important. Second point is that read this guidance document, distill from it what you need, use it for helping you control the risks. If you decide to do zone 1 testing, bottom line, hold the product. If you decide not to do zone 1 testing because of the risks or because of the economics, then please have a really good zone 2, 3, 4 an environmental control program, so that the FDA, should they come in and say, well, you're not following our guidance, you can say with a straight face and good science, not exactly, but we're controlling the risk to the same extent. We got this covered, and hopefully that will solve things. But in terms of any potential regulatory frowning at you because you're not doing zone 1 testing. But my advice to companies is do that. Take this very seriously, have a really good program in place, and make sure that you are controlling the risk. However you choose to do it, control the risk. So back to you, Joe.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have had a few questions that have come in. We'll take a moment to answer just a few of those, and then we'll have to wrap up. One thing, though, I think I'll throw this out, and I know you already sort of addressed it, but we'll just put that out there, is a gentleman's asking, is Zone 1 also as critical to be tested for non-ready-to-eat foods? In his case, it sounds like a rice milling facility.
The FDA certainly recommends it for both.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the way but the way you handle the subsequent positives in a ready-to-eat versus a non-ready-to-eat is differentiated in the guidance document. So I'd recommend that the caller take a look at that. But yeah, they're chasing zone 1s for everything. Yeah.
Okay. And then just reference to the Listeria guidance document, does it apply only to ready-to-eat facilities, or is it broader than that?
Well, a guidance document is a guidance document. It's not a reg. Mm-hmm. So keep in mind that it doesn't require anybody to do anything. It's not binding. It's just advice. It's what FDA would suggest you do. Food Safety Modernization Act, as I'm sure everybody's aware, has got specific requirements in if you're making a ready-to-eat FDA-regulated food that does not get further processed. And requirements for controlling environmental risks. This guidance document is a kind of how-to on that. looking at that through the lens of non-ready-to-eat, I think is valuable. I think it's helpful. You don't want Listeria all over your non-ready-to-eat foods. Why? Because we really don't have a good definition of what's ready to eat and what's not ready to eat from the regulators. It's a very fuzzy line, and as we've all seen, there are certain foods that get out there in commerce where most folk would say, well, that's not ready to eat, but somebody's eaten it, there's been an illness linked to it, and it triggers a recall. So I think this is important to keep in mind irrespective of what it is you're making. If it's ready to eat, really important. If it's not ready to eat, still important, Jill.
Okay, interesting. And another person came in sort of rounding off that question, just in reference as the FDA clarified what they're considering a ready-to-eat product.
Are you asking me, have they?
Yes, that was the question.
Oh, I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
They have said that they're working on trying to define it, but I think it's really difficult. And so much of it is dependent on consumer behaviors. Think back to cookie dough. It's meant to be cooked. It's not, quote, ready to eat, but everybody eats it raw. So I think consumer behaviors and trying to define something that's ready to eat. A lot of the frozen vegetables that were recalled, people would say, well, you got to cook those. And then in reality, they still got recalled last year. So bottom line is I have not seen a clear definition from FDA for RTE versus non-RTE. I think it's a little subjective. And I wouldn't hang my hat on saying, oh, my product is not ready to eat, unless it's a coffee bean or a cocoa bean, which the agency actually calls out in FSMA in certain places, is you simply can't, you can't ingest it, you can't do anything with it without some further processing. Unless you clearly fall solidly into that bucket, then watch out, I think.
Okay, great. Well, with that, my goodness, there's, as I suspected, quite a few more questions that have come in, and I think I'll take this time to make an announcement about FSMA Fridays in concert with the Acheson Group. We are extending FSMA Fridays into a LinkedIn group. As always, every month we get lots of questions that we don't always get to, and we get lots of comments. And I know it's a very lively, active community that we've built here. So we have launched a new LinkedIn group. You will get an invitation to join that, and the intent is to extend the conversation into that group. We will address a few of these questions in that group as well that we were not able to get to, add the session recording in there, and more of a forum just for the peers on the call here to add their thoughts around topics we've discussed or topics that we'd like to discuss in the future. So very excited about that. And again, if Dr. Acheson, if you don't mind, we'll address a few of the questions we didn't get to, extend it into that LinkedIn forum.
Absolutely, Jill, and I think this is a hot topic, and as you say, that we got a lot of questions, and we may want to consider you about discussing some of the key questions in our next FSMA Friday too, because this is a front and center, big cause of recalls, a lot of concerns, what should we do kind of issue, and so I think the questions are wonderful, and maybe we can dive into some of those in a bit more detail with the full audience.
No, I think that's great. I think we should make that happen. Part 2, and yeah, perhaps not a rapid fire, but it ends up being rapid fire with some of these questions. But I think that's a great idea. So with that, as always, I thank Dr. Acheson. Thank you so much for your and your team's continued support in this community effort with FSMA Fridays. Certainly, as the folks know, the Acheson Group is a great website to visit as far as resources, but more importantly, your band of consultants. You keep growing to help the community out. So I encourage everyone to look at that. And then, of course, Safety Chain. We're here as a partner of the community as well, and Food Safety Quality Management Solutions to help ensure that your programs are being executed and catching issues earlier. So with that, again, you will get an invite to the LinkedIn group as well as a recording link. Some events coming up. Folks, if everyone's going to be at the GFSI conference in Houston next week, Safety Chain will be there along with the the Beef Industry Safety Summit, seafood processing come up. And Dr. Acheson, I know you're busy on the road the next few weeks as well. Any places you want to share that you'll be conference-wise?
Actually, I'm going to be a couple of retail and restaurant conferences, one in Kansas City and one in San Diego. So, yeah, unfortunately, I won't be at GFSI, so I'm sure I'll miss a lot of friends and colleagues there, but I bet it'll be a spectacular meeting as always.
Yes, well, this industry, we certainly have tons of events and educational opportunities out there. But anyways, okay, great. Thank you so much. So again, we have lots of questions, and we have captured those, and we'll look forward to extending this session into the LinkedIn group, as well as maybe a little bit of rapid fire question and answer next FSMA Fridays.
Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.